Well, good afternoon. My name is Eli Berbari. I will be presenting the research vignette for today's grand round. I'm a member of the Infectious Disease Division, and I will be talking about prosthetic joint infection. This is an area of research that I'm involved in. This is my conflict of interest, and it happens to be my funding source, too. And I want to thank all these funding mechanisms and sources. Obviously, without them, nothing would be feasible. It all starts at the bedside. It's all clinicians treating patients and asking questions. We've got dental surgeons, such as my friend Alan Carr, who's asking, is my dental procedure going to cause a prosthetic joint infection to a patient with arthroplasty? You've got an orthopedic surgeon, my friend Tate Mabry, who's asking, is this patient at risk for infection if I put an arthroplasty? And if so, how I can diagnose it? And also, you've got the infectious disease doctor who's wondering, like my friend Dr. Osman, in his mind, can I use rifampin in this patient if the prosthesis is retained and is infected? And if so, how successful that is? Can I use 4 weeks or 6 weeks? So it all starts with clinical questions. And we start there, and then we develop a protocol, and we try to address it. This is the outline of my talk. I'll be just giving a few examples of the things we're doing. We'll be talking about some studies looking at risk factors, mostly the dental studies, and some studies looking at host immunity and TLR mutations and association with prosthetic joint infection. And I'll do one or two slides on the outcome, mostly the rifampin data and some other things. This is a study that we just finished analyzing. It's a case control study where we took 339 cases with prosthetic joint infection, matched them with 339 controls, and asked every single patient whether or no they had dental work in the last 2 years, and divided those dental works into high-risk and low-risk patients. As you can see on the slides, low-risk dental procedure was not associated in a positive way with prosthetic joint infection. We also looked at high-risk dental procedure, and similar data were encountered. We looked at whether or no dental prophylaxis, antibiotic prophylaxis, is in any way increase or decrease your risk, and as you can see on the slide, it is not. We hope that with publishing this data that will somehow influence the AAOS, American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons, and the American Dental Association advisory statement that is saying that you should do prophylaxis in patients with arthroplasty when they go to their dentist. We also looked at gastrointestinal procedures, and similar data were derived. Again, no association found. The second question that Dr. Mabry was asking, whether or no is this particular patient at risk for prosthetic joint infection? Why do some patients develop it and mostly others don't? And we have looked at a number of demographic factors, host factors that are associated with prosthetic joint infection. In this particular study, we were interested in looking at certain TLR mutations, which are surface proteins on lymphocyte and immunity cells that recognizes organisms. And if you have a mutation in these genes, you are twice at risk to develop a prosthetic joint infection. This is just giving a hint that somehow some patients are at increased risk despite the fact that they don't have any other known risk factors. In terms of treatment, these were the questions that Dr. Osman was asking, and the use of levorifampin. We embarked a few years ago on a prospective study where we decided to give all of our retained prosthesis levo and rifampin and compared those with a historical control. And as you can see in this time to event curve, that patients that were treated with levofloxacin and rifampin did extremely well in terms of outcome when compared to when they are not giving rifampin. We took the results of these studies, and now we have practice guidelines in our orthopedic infection section where all patients who have staph and retain will get this regimen, and very few are failing, which is an amazing result. In terms of the questions how long to give antibiotics, we looked retrospectively at this and trying to do some adjustment with propensity scores and found no difference in the outcome between people that are treated with 4 weeks of IV antibiotics versus the one that are treated with 6 weeks of IV antibiotics. A recent study that we did and looked at Staph lugdunensis. Staph lugdunensis is a rare organism, but has been increasingly recognized. We looked at patients receiving Cefazolin versus Vanco and found that if you receive Cefazolin, you do clinically better than if you receive Vancomycin. We have a number of studies ongoing right now that looks at prevention, diagnosis, outcome, and we have a couple of interventional studies that we're doing in the field of prosthetic joint infection, trying to address questions that are clinically relevant to us. How can we diagnose it? Who is at risk? How can we better make a diagnosis? We are very excited about a few studies here looking at gene expressions of white cells and see if there's a certain signature from joint fluid that could be somehow used in the diagnosis of patients suspected of having a prosthetic joint infection. Of course, none of these studies that I've showed would be possible without the intervention and the work of many in this group, and I'm mentioning here some from infectious disease, gastroenterology, laboratory medicine, orthopedic surgery, great relationship with our orthopedic surgeons, dental surgery, biostatistics, epidemiology, and of course our study coordinator. I am excited about working with all these people and looking forward to work with them in the future on the current studies and all the future studies that we're planning. I want to thank you all.
Well, good afternoon. It's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Dr. Tom Stossel, that comes from Harvard Medical School. Dr. Stossel will be talking on a hotly debated topic, the relationships between academia and industry. I'll keep my introduction very brief, but Dr. Stossel is a member of the National Academy of Science. He's also a member of the Institute of Medicine. He's an American Cancer Society professor. He's a professor of medicine at the Harvard Medical School. And he's also a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute for Policy, as well as a member for the Lasker Committee for the awards, the Lasker Awards. So without further ado, Dr. Stossel.
Well, thank you, Raphael. It's really, I bet that's my cell phone. Let's turn that. To be here, this is such a wonderful place, and if medicine in this country were run the way you guys run it, we wouldn't have all the problems we have. The problem is you have to live here. Well, as Raphael said, this is a controversial subject, and in fact, I would say it's not controversial enough, because most of the conversation has really been on one side of it. So I hope I can make it more controversial for you. Now, let me begin by answering the question that I posed on this slide, and the answer is, it depends. It depends. And the real question we have to address is implicit in the title, which has these advertent allusions to religion, sin, and salvation. Do we want medicine to be run as a scientific, evidence-based enterprise or as something based on quasi-religious beliefs? So what I'm going to try to cover is briefly mention a bit about the history and the scope of money. It's easier to talk about sex these days than money, but we have to talk about money. And then the history of how the animus against money has become to be so prominent. I will then try to outline some of the errors of that animus. I can't do them all, but I'll do what I think are the most important ones. And then also, more importantly, put it in the context of a risk-benefit analysis. And then I'll try to point out that there are costs of this animus against money, make some recommendations, and of course, have to do my conflict of interest disclosures. Now, it's too bad that this book is out of print. This was written by a Welsh radiologist at Cambridge University in 1952 called The Cost of Health. And what Roberts said was that from the second that medicine hooked itself up to science, it began to feed upon itself, and the infusion of all the interest that came with that meant that the costs were going to rise exponentially forever. And the way he put it, it's a wonderful expression, is that we went from curing people or killing people to putting them into a state of medicated survival. I'll take that. So I take my Lipitor every day. So the medicated survival meant that the costs were going to go up exponentially. And you can see the curve that he plotted for UK between 1900 and 1950. And of course, we all, what we all hear is if we can just get everybody covered, universal coverage, and emphasize prevention, the costs are going to come down. That's what happened with the National Health Services. The costs will go up when you cover everybody, and prevention, even with electronic records, I don't think is going to save costs. Now, Robert's prediction was just a blip on this curve, which shows what's happened since. He was absolutely right. And so that we have the continued exponential increase. And what Roberts also pointed out, there's only two ways to deal with it. One is your ration, and the other is your prosperity. You keep your prosperity high enough so you can pay for this exponential increase. And we've sort of done that, even though we whine about it all the time. Now, let's get off the table here that the major driver for this exponential cost is not drugs, is not medical products. It's less than 15% of the total. And if all the companies gave away their products for free tomorrow, we would save, it's been estimated, maybe 5% of costs for 1 year. Now, this is a medical school. We're very concerned about research and education. And the points to make here are, you can see that the red dots, which is the increase in private investment in research and education. And the critics would say it's not really research because it's marketing. That's why I call it education in quotes. Follows the exponential curve of Roberts. And notice that it also follows those green squares, which is the number of people in a state of medicated survival. It's the people who are over 100 years old. So this isn't a conspiracy. This is simply the free enterprise adapting to the opportunity that there are more and more people out there to make products for, and they make them. And then you also notice that the blue dots, which are the public investment in research, goes in fits and starts. It's a stutter step because it's dependent upon political vagaries. And then you'll also notice the huge gap that now exists between the public and the private out here. And if we are even going to dream of continuing to do our work in research and education, we better get our hands on those red dots, because I don't see where else we are ever going to get them. Now, finally, on this slide is a very important event, which is the founding of the biotechnology industry and the Bayh-Dole Act. And these were watershed events that started a great industry and has provided wonderful products. Unfortunately, it didn't accomplish the goal that it should have, which is to change the attitude of medicine towards money. And I'll come back to that. Now, this is very important, too, which shows the granularity of the interface between industry, private industry, and medicine. And as you can see, it's very detailed. And the relationship between, say, technology licensing and clinical trials is huge, that the people don't even exist in the same universe. And yet we tend to cover this industry-medicine interface as if it were a single thing, and that's a big mistake. Now, nobody even worried about this very much publicly, and as the term conflict of interest, which is code for taking money from a private source, it wasn't on the radar screen until the late 1980s, where there was this huge outpouring of books and articles about conflict of interest. It was just about that time that I evolved from my totally ignorant, youthful lack of understanding of how products come to market, and I joined the scientific advisory board of a biotech company, and I just couldn't see any relationship between what these people were saying and what my experience on the ground was. And so I became obsessed with this topic, and I've read all these books and articles for the last 20 years, and I rant, and my wife says, "Hon, we're going to have a conflict of interest-free zone this morning." And I started writing and speaking about it about 3 years ago. It's very interesting to notice that the role of the high-profile medical journals have taken in this. I don't think there's been almost a single article in the JAMA or the New England Journal in the last 20 years advocating for more money for biomedical research, but it's filled with articles about conflict of interest. Now, the proximate cause of this outburst was an incident that took place near where I live at the Massachusetts Eye and Ear Infirmary. The details don't matter, but this is what started the whole thing going. And the fact is that it wasn't just that case. There's always been an undercurrent of hostility about money in medicine. And here we have this article from the JAMA in 1901, unchecked commercialism threatens to undermine the scientific basis for rational therapeutics, debauches our journals, and taints our textbooks. And then you have this thing from Osler, that you're in this profession as a calling, not a business. You get to a business level, your influence is gone, your light of your life is dimmed. You work in the missionary spirit, breadth of charity raises you above the petty jealousies of life. So this religious kind of cant has been around for a long time, and I think here at the Mayo Clinic that your founders were putting that kind of stuff out too. We all have our different ancestors that we worship. Now, what is different about then and now, however, is the hysteria, that the incredible sort of energy that has gone into this. And this book was written in the middle of the 19th century, talked about bubbles, you know. So there was the tulip bubble and the Crusades and the witch hunts and all that, and we could add the subprime mortgage bubble, and then we have a conflict of interest bubble. So what are the allegations? All right, you've heard them all. The companies simply take the gold that NIH-sponsored research has mined, puts it in a wheelbarrow, and takes it to the bank. The reason that the marketing is so bad is because from the ground, the research and promotion are corrupt. The FDA is in bed with the industry, and it's an urban legend that a drug rep comes, gives you a pen or a mug or a pizza slice, and you go off and uncontrollably prescribe drugs to patients that they don't need and that are more expensive than they should have. And that all the goodies, the tchotchkes, the money, or whatever you take from companies erodes your professionalism and destroys the trust that the public has in us as physicians. Now, these allegations get garnished with varying degrees of disclaimer. Well, you know, companies are important, blah, blah, blah. Or the stridency varies depending on who you listen to. But you can't have it both ways. That if you buy any of this, you buy it all. Because the fundamental principle is that company-sponsored research, marketing, all that is not to be trusted because companies are different than us physicians. So what has this got us? It's got a lot. The sum total of the allegations and all the hysteria has resulted in this massive disclosure. I have no idea. I can't keep track of them because I speak a lot. You know, how many forms I filled out so I can give this lecture and how many, you know, attestations I made that I wasn't going to hose you people with off-label what this or that. You know, what is part of the social fabric of all of our society. You know, you take people out to dinner, you give them things, you know, that's gone, absolutely gone. And it's a little disingenuous. You know, Pfizer doesn't care because it doesn't have to pay for the stuff anymore, and Merck isn't doing it, so it's no big deal. And then, so it's really a huge amount of confession and coercion. And it tells you where you can associate with people, what you can do, whether you can write an editorial, whether you can serve on an FDA panel, and it tells you how much you can be paid, because if we can control prices, payments, that will somehow make medicine more professional and more reliable. Now, despite all this, this isn't enough. And the New York Times is right on it every week and says that none of the steps would completely sever the medical profession. That's what we want. We want to completely sever from the medical profession and doctors from the disturbing ties to the drug industry. So what is the evidence for those disturbing ties? Why are they disturbing? Well, first of all, the pervasive dependency, I don't see exactly what the evidence for that is, because here we're back to this curve again. And this, from the Association of University Technology Managers, is the actual amount of industry money that comes to universities. You know, compared to what we could be getting, it's not very much. So I'm not sure what the pervasive tie here is. But the scripture, the gold standard for the pervasive influence, for what's bad about industry, which is mainly its marketing, is this paper. This paper is quoted in all the commissions, all of the academic policies that address this issue. And this is a paper written in the JAMA by a Canadian psychiatrist named Ashley WAZANA. And what she did was took all the studies written in the early 90s that reviewed interactions between doctors and the drug industry. And here's what she concluded. These are the conclusions of the study. There were positive outcomes and there were negative outcomes. Positive outcome, improved ability to identify the treatment for complicated illnesses. Negative outcomes, non-rational prescribing. That's based on a single study that was done in Holland. Increased prescribing and formulary requests for the promoted meds, and fast new drug prescribing. Is that good or bad? So you add this up, unless I'm missing something, seems to me like this industry marketing is pretty good. Then there's, of course, a positive attitude toward drug reps. Now, if I seem a little testy about that one, it's because I sleep with a drug rep. My wife, Carrie McGuire, is a dentist and has a degree in public health. She's worked in academia. She's worked in industry. She's currently the professional advocacy director, which means marketing, for a company called Tom's of Maine, which was purchased recently by Colgate. And I just think it's outrageous that she has to get somebody's mother's permission to go and meet with dentists in a dental school or with dental students and buy them some pizza and talk about products so they can learn about it. So what amazes me is that nobody seems to be upset about the incredible degree of disrespect that this mania has brought upon us. You only hear from the 3 disgruntled drug reps who have had a mystical vision and a conversion experience and write about their speaking in the New York Times. But what about the thousands and thousands of hardworking people working in anonymous drudgery? Where are they? Now let's put the risks in the context of benefits. In 1967, when I was a resident at the Massachusetts General Hospital, the Mass General had just been voted #1 in America, hospital #1 in America, by the Ladies' Home Journal. I had some amazing instructors. Mike Brown and Joe Goldstein went on to win the Nobel Prize for their work on cholesterol metabolism. Here's your colleague, Dick Winchelbaum, world-renowned pharmacogeneticist. I was the control. Despite these luminaries and the high ranking of the Mass General, we practiced, by today's standards, terrible, unsafe medicine. A patient with a myocardial infarction lay on our ward for a month, and we looked at them. You know, they spent a week lying in bed, then they'd put their legs over, then they would walk around for a few days. I mean, can you imagine what that would cost today? And the difference between then and now is not that doctors are smarter. That's impossible. Their doctors are nicer and more diverse, but it's because of the tools that you and I have now that we didn't have then. And those tools all come from industry. Now, I could make 10 slides like this. This is all stuff we have today that we didn't have back in 1967. 10 slides I could make like this. And not everything works when the companies develop these products. And sometimes they don't work. And all you hear about is how they hide it, they slant it, they spin it. But you never hear that cases like this, that when Bristol-Myers Squibb decided that Lipitor wasn't going to be better than their statin, and they spent a ton of money on a study to show it, and it didn't work out. Lipitor was better. This was published within 3 weeks of the trial data being unveiled, at a huge loss to the company. And just last week, there were 2 papers showing that were sponsored by on trials sponsored by stent companies that showed that cabbage is better than stents, and they were published in a totally timely manner. We never hear about that from the media. Now, the context, the benefits that industry interaction provides can be seen really graphically on this slide, where we see the 50% decrease in cardiovascular mortality that's occurred since I was an intern. And the trouble is, see, most of you came into this field out here. You think that stuff has always been there, that Santa Claus brought it. But no, it came with the hard-earned work, and these econometric studies show it is, in fact, the development of the products by companies that have made the difference. And what these insets are studies that show that it's not the NIH. The NIH is important, but in fact, there's a six-fold return on investment from every dollar that the NIH puts into research that all comes into the additional money that industry does. And then this shows, this is based on the truth about the drug companies, the truth about drug innovation, that companies do innovate. Okay, so if you're not going to die of the number one cause of death, cardiovascular disease, the death rate still stays the same, right? 1 per person. So that you now drop into the number 2 category, which is cancer. And you can see here that cancer kind of perked along, and now it's coming down. And that's probably because of colonoscopy due to good devices that companies make. So this is the ball we ought to be keeping our eye on, that value, that interaction with industry has brought value. But the trouble is that there's a confusion of value and merit. Let me just explain that. Merit is what I like and what I don't like. And I know that. I know that today. Value, I don't know today, because only value will be determined by what my work brings tomorrow. So merit's easy, value is hard. But the discussion is all about merit. So let's take 2 examples. Ghostwriting. Okay, that one of the slogans that's front and center in the conflict of interest field. What's ghostwriting of low merit and low value? So, company writes a paper about their product, spins it, misrepresents stuff, and gives it to me, and pays me to put my name on it. I don't even read it, and it gets published. Has that ever happened? Probably. It probably has, but I don't think it happens very often. So how can ghostwriting have value? Well, how many of you write well? How many of you don't procrastinate when it's time to write? If you've just invested $1 billion in a product, you want to get the paper out, okay? So you hire writers who are good at writing, and they write a draft. And the ghostwriters, fortunately, have organizations. They get together, they have codes of ethics, and they believe that they perform a valuable service. Now, that's not true for speakers' bureaus, which is another merit-value confusion. What's low-merit, low-value speaker bureau? Well, if I come here and I say I consult for Lilly, and you should treat patients with diabetes with insulin. By the way, you only use Lilly insulin, and give them 10 times the usual dose, and give it off-label for insomnia, because in my experience, that would be bad speakers, ghost speaking. But the fact is, so what's good value ghost speaking? Well, none of you, I would imagine, are going to go to Michigan City, Indiana, where my in-laws live, and where they periodically get dried out at St. Anthony's Hospital there, and you wouldn't go there and give a talk on diabetes. But someone in southern Michigan who's got a Medicaid practice and can barely make ends meet, has debts from medical school, has kids to educate, can make some extra money, and gets the company slides, goes to St. Anthony's and gives a talk on diabetes. And docs like to hear from other docs, and the only fact that the docs at St. Anthony's know anything is because they hear from that ghost speaker. Now, isn't that terrible that the company gave the person the slides? Why do they do that? It's not because the slides tell lies. It's because it's FDA regulated, that it has to be FDA compliant. And they want to be darn sure that that doc doesn't say only use the Lilly insulin, and that's why they make the slides. And you're perfectly able to change it. So I think this is an area where there's definite value, and it's something, I don't think you guys can do this, but I hope that by raising your consciousness out of it, that those of you who want to do it will fight back and get it back on the agenda, because there's a big gap in CME in this country. All right, now what is the roster of bad value that companies have brought us? Now remember, I read all the papers and the articles, and I may have missed a few, but this is it. I can put it all on one slide, as opposed to the 20 slides I could make about value. So these are bad things. And it's a huge industry. And there's, bell-shaped curve of humanity. Saints, serial killers, everybody in between. You know, people are going to do bad things. All right. How about the bad merit? Okay, this is the stuff that I don't even think is actually a problem. Here it is. I can put it all in one slide. What's the real thing? Large amount of money. It's the prurient interest in the money that is right up there in the animus against money in medicine. Now, what do we mean by large payments? Well, here's the New York Times again. Over the years, prominent physicians have received hefty fees for conducting research, consulting, or giving educational speeches touting the virtues of drugs to their colleagues. Is that a bad thing? Well, what's a hefty fee anyway? Seems like the only way you can have an upside in medicine is to be a brain surgeon or an administrator. Raphael made me take the Mayo Clinic off this slide. Now, I have no problem with these people making a lot of money. I wouldn't want their jobs. You know, it seems like terrible jobs. But for the people, those of you, those of us who work in anonymous drudgery, innovating, working in the clinics, that if we can be rewarded, what's wrong with that? And so when Gardner Harris of the New York Times, he hasn't done it, but when he's going to call me, he says, hey, Tom, I see you got all this money from fill in the blank doing it. I say, yeah, it's because I'm good. If I wasn't good, I'd be a reporter for the New York Times. And then where does the money come from? Where does this money come from? Marketing. Marketing. It's okay for us to market, but companies can't market. Now, so why is I give a Stanford mug, a Harvard mug? I guess there must be Mayo mugs, and I can't have a Pfizer mug, you know. And this ad, which was in the back of the New York Times Magazine, is worse than any primetime Viagra ad that I've ever seen. You know, and this comes of the U.S. Air magazine, you just want to send your girlfriend or your wife to UPMC to get a gynecology treatment because of this young woman clutching a starfish? I mean, what's the evidence base of that? Hospitals are aggressive. And then here, it's really interesting that what's become the marketing ploy is we're not commercial. Is the medical letter, which I consider the Cliff Notes of drug information, better than the package insert? He says, well, we're not commercial, so you should buy us and pay us. It's all about money. Academic, so that's the academic. My colleague Jerry Avorn, who is going to be part of the stimulus package, is going to get a big boondoggle to go to he's in the state of Pennsylvania, and if he can get everybody on cheap generics, he'll get his contract renewed. Is that a conflict of interest? Tell me. Now, this is the other bit of scripture that deals with professionalism. And I have to wonder if people really read these papers. It's quoted all the time. Have any of you read this? Let's read the first paragraph. The current influence of market incentives in the USA is posing extraordinary challenges to professionalism. Physicians' commitment to altruism, putting the interests of patients first, scientific integrity, and an absence of bias in medical decision-making now regularly come up against financial conflicts of interest. It's talking about you. Is that you? Well, it's not me. I don't believe this. If you don't agree, then this is fabrication. What's the evidence for this? There is no evidence. What is the evidence that professionalism is equivalent to abstract altruism? We'll come back to that. But let's talk about absence of bias as the definition of scientific integrity. I've been doing research for 35 years. I've had some success at it. I have never, as is alleged, been subtly biased because of some reward I'm going to be given. I've always been totally biased. You have to be totally biased to survive. But my track record is that when I've been shown to be wrong, I admit it. And I think that probably applies for most of you. So biases are part of life. And making a quantitative statement like how all of these good things we're trying to do are regularly, what does regularly mean? That's a quantitative statement, is fabrication. So this paper actually meets 2 of the 3 criteria for scientific fraud, fabrication and falsification, because it also went on to say that the systematic review of the medical literature by WAZANA, which I just showed you, found an overwhelming majority of interactions had negative results on clinical care. Is that what I showed you what the conclusions were, and what WAZANA specifically said was there's no data like that. So it's fabrication and falsification. It doesn't qualify because they didn't do it on purpose. They were just sloppy. How could they do this? These are supposedly highly placed people in American medicine. Well, none of them makes a living seeing patients, and not one of them has contributed anything to medical innovation. And if they're calling me corrupt, I'm going to turn around and out them in the same way. Now, let's sort of close out here on this professionalism thing. Where does the idea that money is evil fall in the definition of medical professionalism? And it's, I think, on very clear historical grounds, because medicine had a well-deserved inferiority complex prior to its scientific underpinnings. Doctors couldn't do much, and people were pretty much aware of that. And so that what doctors did was try to hook themselves up with aristocrats who eschew trade, and because they have slaves and serfs to do the work for them. And but this is not relevant any longer. Let's face it, medicine is a service business. Doctors are not judges. They're not government officials. They're there to provide good service. Now, there's another interesting thing about this animus against money and professionalism, which is the dualism. So I refer to as dualism. And you see it in the iconography. Here's this famous Sir Luke Fildus portrait of the doctor staring lovingly at the patient for whom he's doing nothing. And you have the doctors doing something in the pockets of the plutocrat. And that's the iconography. Then there's the creed, which is, you've all heard this, that the physician's fiduciary responsibility is to patients and industry's fiduciary responsibility is to its shareholders. What does that mean? That's nonsense. Yeah, it's just what they want it to mean is that industry can lie, cheat, steal for the bottom line. And that isn't that industry doesn't do that. And do doctors ever lie, cheat, and steal? Of course they do. And we got to catch them and put them in jail. And then there's this other really sort of uncomfortable thing is that, well, you know, some of my best friends are fill in the blank, you know, and I as long as they don't act like fill in the blanks, you know, and just call that with industry. It's a racial prejudice. It puts industry in an impossible position. Industry, you know, it's fine. We'll take all your money. Be an ATM for the Mayo Clinic. You know, we'll just do whatever with your money, what we want to do with it, because it has nothing to do with your profit or you're selling anything. Huh? But that's exactly where we're going with this. Now, what's with the monkey and the car salesman? That one of the arguments against evolution, and I'm not kidding you, is that, and Raphael put me onto this in a book that he sent me, is that if we descended from monkeys, that means we can act like monkeys. So it's the same thing. If we're in the same universe with car salesmen, that means we can act like car salesmen. Okay, and it's just as stupid, and it's unfair to car salesmen, and it's wrong. We don't have to act like car salesmen. So in this discussion, nobody ever talks about the benefits and the costs. Now that we've gotten rid of all the mugs and the pizzas and the pens, and we stop congratulating ourselves, are we really practicing better medicine? Anybody think we are? I don't think so. And so it's not helping. I don't think it's helping anything. What are the costs? Well, you know, the NIH for the past 4 years has had this complete consulting ban, and they're having a hard time recruiting and retaining. And there was recently a commission chaired by David Baltimore said they ought to get rid of it. I mean, it was really a dumb idea. It was done for really stupid reasons. Now, back to Michigan City, St. Anthony's Hospital. It's harder and harder to get funding for CME. And the Macy Foundation, and I'm pretty soon, I think, the IOM and other of these worthies come and say, we should take all commercial support out of CME. Well, who's going to pay for it? Less CME? That is obviously what the result is going to be. But I think the most important opportunity cost here is at the innovation level. You guys discover things, and this affects a relatively small percentage of your staff. But it's a very important percentage of your staff because they're the ones who get that new stuff, the good stuff that's made medicine so much better. So, but when you discover something, it's very unlikely that Merck or GSK or Pfizer or Amgen are going to license it and take it because it's too early. The risk is too high. And let's talk a little bit about that risk. Now, you've all heard this, but let's go through it. So it takes 16 years and over $1 billion to get a product to market. 5 to 10,000 compounds, 250 enter clinical testing, 5 make it to the clinic, and 1 gets approved. Problem is, you've heard this so often, and it's delivered with so little passion by pharma, the lobby for the pharmaceutical company, that it just glazes you over. You say, and Marcia Angel says, anyway, they're just lying because it's pharma. But let me get it to you a different way. A Greek economist named Ioannidis, who's really an interesting guy, scrolled 25,000 plus publications over a period of time and looked at how many actually suggested that the results of that research might have some practical implication. 0.4%, 100 of 25,000. So a lot of research goes on and not very much even thinks about it. Now, 27 of those ended up in a clinical trial. And what's really interesting, if one of the people involved had a commercial connection, there was almost an order of magnitude greater chance of that happening. So then, of those 27, 5 got approved by the FDA, and 1 is in use. I think that's ACE inhibitors for myocardial, post-myocardial infarction, heart failure. And according to his study, the translation lag was 16.5 years, which is exactly what the pharma figures show. So you can sit in the ivory tower and talk about translation, but hey, it is hard and it doesn't happen very often. So why would we make it harder than it needs to be? Now, what about Me Too drugs and all this kind of stuff and all this marketing? Well, someone's got to pay for it, and it's when you say, why do we need another statin? Well, I'm glad I could take a little tiny bit of Lipitor instead of a big amount of generic Mevacor, because I just like putting less stuff in me. I can't prove that that's good, but I have that choice, and I think that's a good thing. But if instead of developing another statin, you should do something really important, like a cure for Alzheimer's disease. Anybody got any ideas? So you have to fund the enterprise until, in a way that's unplanned and unplannable, you get to that incremental product. And I'd love to give this grand rounds on a totally different topic, which is my 35 years of dorky cytoskeletal research that I've now parlayed into trying to get the 6th most abundant protein in your blood. You know what that? Gelsolin. Anybody ever heard of it? You're in good company. It's the 6th most abundant protein. It gets depleted in injury and inflammation. You give it back to animals, and they live. And so in injury. And so we're in clinical trials with that. I'm raising money for it now. That money will never be raised. This will never get a chance to be tested if the investment doesn't get unlocked. And that investment will only happen if there's the prospects for big profits at the end of the day. So let me come to the end here by making my recommendations. Disclosure. I'm all for disclosure. Disclosure is fine. But let's ask ourselves, what exactly are we doing? Now, the gentleman here, credited the people who said, I couldn't have done the study, right, on the prosthetic devices, and I'm glad. I hang out with a lot of dentists, and I'll tell them, that they don't need to put me on antibiotics. But we used to do this to credit our sponsors, but now it's clearly a black box warning. And it gets beyond that because the critics are out there to embarrass you, and even worse, the tort lawyers are out there to try to get you into so-called failure to warn suits. And yesterday I was mentioned in the New York Times about this topic at Harvard Medical School, and there was a thing about some Pfizer rep who took pictures of students who were the AMSA students, which is the American Medical Association, whatever, who are against drug companies, and already Senator Grassley has sent a letter to Pfizer demanding that this guy be shot because he took a picture of the students. Okay, so why is disclosure really important? This goes back to what I said, the failed watershed. When those world-class scientists who founded the biotech industry and made a lot of money and did good things, if they had said, look at us, we're good and we can be famous scientists and we can get rich too, and if they still did that, then the critics who do nothing would have no credibility whatsoever. But they've hidden in the closet. And in a way, it's understandable. Why would you volunteer to be beaten up by the New York Times and the critics? But we have to bring their track records out and because then we can put this in better perspective. And the other thing is that every time another commission, as is happening at Harvard now, gets together to decide a policy, we put together a few grand eminences and ethicists and medical students. And why would the Mayo Clinic want to establish a policy on how to manage myeloma or diabetes by putting together a commission like that? We have to take into account that granularity, that this is the devil's in the details, and that those of you who are actually in the trenches doing the work need to be more actively involved in these policy decisions. It's not just no medicines were discovered at the New York Times or in the U.S. Congress. It's all done here, and you can't worry about them, pleasing them, if we're going to go forward. And then this is a great quote from a book that is amazing. It describes the history of the FDA from its beginning till now, till the late 90s. And what the book points out is that the agony, the tension between how you get new things to doctors who don't know how to use them, and between having it be effective as opposed to dangerous, hasn't changed in 100 years. But despite the persistence of that tension, we have better and better and better medicines because on balance and incrementally, that's what happens. And his point is that all our behaviors are interested. Statisticians are concerned about the financial as well as the intellectual health of controlled trials are interested. Imputing interest to someone or some group tells us nothing about what they propose to do or doing or whether it's scientific or rational. In other words, it's always my science against your greed, and that's false. So I think the way we should handle this is the same way we deal with scientific misconduct. Misconduct appeared like conflict of interest suddenly in the 70s. And academic institutions were not well prepared to deal with it. We didn't have systems in place. But I think we ended up dealing with it in a sensible way. First of all, we kept the definition limited. Fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. Now, there are always people who want to push the envelope on the definition. But the fact is we tolerate pretty tacky behavior from our colleagues and our competitors. And we deal with it by, if they injure us, we fight back. We don't go to trial every time there's some imagined grievance that is against us. And that works pretty well. And then there's a process now, and allegations of misconduct get reported to your institution and then to the Office of Research Integrity if the NIH is involved. And by the way, there hasn't been a single case of scientific misconduct reported to the ORI that's involved the company. And that reason is obvious because the companies have so much more at stake and so much more accountability and feedback than academic institutions do. And we don't, if we catch people committing fraud, we take them out and punish them. We don't say you can't drive a fast car as a way to deal with speed limits. And then back in 1987, when the first incident occurred at the Mass Eye and Ear Infirmary, it was possible it was the tip of an iceberg. But I would say that 20 years of experience would suggest that hasn't been the case, and we should lighten up. So, in the spirit of the times, I will show you my conflicts of interest, and while you're perusing that, I'll make one final point. My wife and I have established a foundation in Zambia. And twice a year now, we go to Zambia and provide dental prevention, and I'm starting to build a sickle cell program at the main university teaching hospital there. Now, why am I telling you this? Well, first of all, it's just I can be as much of a do-gooder as anybody, and so that I put my ill-gotten commercial gains to good use. I wouldn't have to. I could do anything I want with it. But also to make the point that I'd love to take you all with me because it's a great experience. I've done thousands of fluoride treatments on kids. I'm sure that I'm the only hematologist that's ever done that, and I don't think I have to worry about their prosthetic joints in that they don't have them. But also that if you come to Zambia with me, you would see that it's not business, it's not money that's bad for your health, it's the lack of it. And so with that, I thank you for your attention. Questions?
Yeah.
You want?
Looks like they're afraid of you. free sandwich today. Would I have been in conflict? My name wasn't on the list.
You're not a resident.
I didn't finish mine. You can have the rest of mine. You look a little emaciated.
But Tom, I think we hear you loud and clear. But you do admit that there could be abuses. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
And so the question is, you think that this can all be handled as a scientific misconduct, the process, due process that has been established for that? So it could be a limited.
I mean, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think the other point which I didn't make as well as I should is that I emphasize how difficult the innovation piece is. There's all kinds of science and technology that's in an institution like this that should be being developed, should be getting into startups. And we do a terrible job of that. Because our tech transfer people are overworked and don't have the expertise. We don't train people how to do it. They don't understand. I don't think people understand the economics of this. And that's where the energy should go. That the fact that the energy goes to all of this police state activity in our professional societies and in our institutions is terrible. And of course, I mean, every time that the Attorney General, and there are all kinds of, there's Attorney Generals, the Office of the Inspector General, everybody know what qui tam cases are? That's a whistleblower thing. If you rat out somebody in your company who's promoting something inappropriately, you get 30% of the take. So that gets people's attention. So the idea that the FDA and industry are in some kind of adversarial. I mean, when I go to the FDA, I want to say, let's work together to get, and my Gelsolin project, the last thing I want to do is kill people with it. I want to make sure it's safe and that it's effective. So I just think we've inverted reality. We've assumed that people do things, that most error is due to intention, and it's not. It's due to inadvertent error and bad luck. No.
When there's scientific misconduct related to industry versus not related to industry, funded by NIH, National Science Foundation, do you think there's parity in the interest of the media and scientific journals to out these people and discuss the individual cases, or is there some greater desire to report on the industry-related offenses versus federally funded research offenses?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'd say that there haven't been any misconduct, real misconduct cases involving industry. And it may be because it's not NIH funded, it doesn't get reported to the NIH. But just in terms of the media and journals' interest in bad behavior, is it's much more focused on industry than it is academia, or for that matter, the tort system. The JAMA and the New England Journal are in love with the tort bar, which is pretty astonishing considering their parent organizations want tort reform. And they both come down against preemption. So I think there's very little balance, as I indicated, in the journals. You're one of the few exceptions. Yes?
I fully agree with you. I think we are an incident-driven society. There's incidents that happen. There's a sentinel event team. And then everybody goes and tries to develop themes to prevent that event from happening in the future. And in that event, we forget that 99% of the events are occurring normally. So we develop policies to prevent that from happening. In the meanwhile, these policies are hampering what we normally do. And that's just becoming, a bigger and bigger and bigger. Every day, I have an email that I have to attend a course or fill a form, and it's taking a tremendous amount of time from research and from education and things that are really meaningful. I piled up the things that I should be doing every year, and there's probably about 40 things. Everything's about 30 minutes. And who's giving me that time? We're losing that time, instead of doing something more meaningful. It's the same thing.
Part of this is the fault of our own success. So the great economist Joseph Schumpeter, who coined the term creative destruction, made the point that what was going to kill capitalism is not what Marx said, but the sheer size of the enterprise. And so what happens is that corporations, like this institution, become so big and so bureaucratized, and it hires more and more compliance bureaucrats who come up with all these things, HIPAA and animals and IRB and this and that. And the late Judah Folkman used to refer to this as chronophagia, the eating of time. And it's, and somebody says it's just unavoidable. It's just unavoidable. But when it gets totally out of, and that's why those of us who are doing the work, we abdicate. See, we abdicate to how many of you recertify for the American Board of Internal Medicine? Okay, what's it cost these days? $1,400. $1,400. And do you know where that money goes? So they made so much money, the ABIM, that they started a foundation. So it gets siphoned into a foundation. And last I checked, they had $80 million stashed away. What are they doing with it? Well, they sponsored that Brennan article. And then when Troy Brennan was on the board of the ABIM, he published an article in the New England Journal that said, old geezers like me shouldn't be grandfathered. I should be taking the test too, without disclosing that he was on the board of the ABIM. I don't think they're drinking screw-top Ripple at McDonald's in Philadelphia when they meet, and to have strong feelings about it. But the point is they're the ones that we let decide whether we can practice, whether we get accreditation. It's the same with the CME accreditation. Go look these people up. That's the track record piece, and say, are these people you'd want to, tell you how to run your life?
To the argument, might not medicine be a little further ahead than Wall Street and the finance industry in what we are doing as far as our own image of our field in having gone these directions over the last especially 5 years?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's 5 years. I think it's close.
But 5 years has been a real
5 years we've been whining about it, but it's existed, when I went to my first American Society of Hematology meeting, there were a few booksellers, but 20 years ago we had big exhibits and tchotchkes and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think, think about it. Once again, I always come back to, it would be nice if we all went around in black robes and behaved, beatifically and so forth. But the fact is, the patients don't care about that, and the polls have shown that. The patients just want to get good service, and they want the latest thing, and they don't care who pays you or how much. So this public trust thing is just a canard. Wall Street, people are thrown out of their houses. They've lost their life savings. What exactly is the damage that doctors have played golf with a drug rep? Just get real and put it in perspective.
You mentioned the point about black robes. None of us works for free, and I think part of the issue about professionalism and sort of the sanctimonious behavior of physicians is sort of predicated on the false assumption that we work for free, when in fact we're actually very well paid for what we do relative to a lot of our colleagues. How much of our kind of schizophrenia about this do you think depends on this psychological split between the sort of the friar and the black robe self-image and the fact that we're well paid?
I think it's a huge thing, and it's it's like there's a book that Raphael said, guilt is a gift that keeps on giving, and it's the old joke about the medical student who goes for an interview, and you say, why do you want to go to medical school? Oh, because I'll get really well paid and have a secure job. No, I want to help people, and and that's it. And the fact is, and the reality is, it doesn't matter. If you're a surgeon and you're up to your elbows in my chest, I don't care what you're thinking about your stock holdings. I just want to make sure you get me tied up and put back together right. So. I think, once again, I think in medical school, who teaches ethics? What's ethics? The students have to, it's a kind of a little sideshow they have to deal with, and it's not the doers and the shakers who are teaching the ethics, it's the ethicists. And they load them down with all this stuff.